Nobody at the Bramwell County Punkin Chunkin World Championship expected the sky to crack open right as Earl Dawson's trebuchet locked back for the record throw of the season. Before you keep watching, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. Because what happens next in this quiet Ohio field is about to get completely out of hand. Now let's step into this wild ride together, right from the beginning. The morning of the championship started the way it always did in Bramwell County. Fog sat low over the cornfields. A rooster somewhere near the Hendricks farm refused to shut up, and half the county was already lined up along Route 9 with lawn chairs, coolers, and folding tables loaded with fried dough and lemonade. The Bramwell County Punkin Chunkin World Championship was not just a competition. It was the one weekend a year when every trebuchet builder, air cannon tinkerer, and backyard engineer in the state came together to see whose pumpkin could fly the farthest without turning into orange soup halfway there. Earl Dawson stood beside his machine, a 30-foot-tall wooden trebuchet named All Thunderjaw, built from scrap steel, an old grain silo frame, and more stubbornness than sense. Earl was 54 years old, built like a man who had spent 3 decades hauling feed sacks, and he had a mustache that had not changed since 1998. Beside him stood his wife, Wanda Dawson, who handled the math and the tension calculations, because Earl was better at yelling encouragement than doing long division. "You sure that counterweight's set right?" Earl asked, squinting up at the machine. "It's set right because I set it," Wanda said, not even looking up from her clipboard. "You just worry about pulling the pin at the right second and let the machine do what it's built to do." Nearby, Sheriff Roy Tanner walked the fence line with his thumbs hooked in his belt, keeping an eye on the crowd more out of habit than necessity. Bramwell County had not seen a real crime since somebody stole Miss Patterson's garden gnome in 2019, and even that got solved in an afternoon. Roy liked it that way, quiet, predictable, boring even. Boring was good. At the edge of the fairground, a teenager named Tyler Briggs was making final adjustments to a homemade air cannon built out of PVC pipe, an old air compressor, and a sprinkler valve he had rigged with a bicycle pump trigger. Tyler was 17, wore safety goggles that did not match anything else he owned, and had already told 3 different judges that his cannon could put a 10-pound pumpkin over 400 yards. Nobody believed him yet. Behind the judge's table sat old Walt Higgins, 71 years old. Retired from 30 years working propulsion systems for a defense contractor before he came home to Bramwell County to grow the biggest pumpkins in 3 counties. Walt did not say much, but when he did, people listened, mostly because he was the only man in the county who had ever calculated a trajectory using something called a slide rule. And then there was Big Bertha, sitting on a reinforced wooden pallet near the judging tent, gleaming a deep, almost impossible orange under the morning sun. Big Bertha was Walt's pumpkin, 1,142 pounds of pure county fair legend, grown over an entire summer with a secret mixture Walt refused to share with anyone, including his own daughter. Big Bertha was not entered into the Chunkin competition. Big Bertha was entered into the giant pumpkin way off, a separate contest of pure size, and Walt guarded her like she was made of gold. By 10 in the morning, the field was packed. Kids ran between hay bales, a local band played somewhere near the funnel cake stand, and Big Mike, who ran the corn dog stand every single year without fail, had already sold out of his first batch. The announcer, a cheerful man named Dale Kowalski, stood at the microphone stand with a checklist in one hand and a can of soda in the other. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dale called out, his voice booming across the fairground, "welcome to the 43rd Annual Bramwell County Punkin Chunkin World Championship. We've got trebuchets, we've got air cannons, we've got one very suspicious-looking contraption from the Miller brothers that legal counsel asked us to inspect twice. And we are ready to make some pumpkin history today." The crowd cheered. Earl cracked his knuckles. Tyler checked his pressure gauge one more time. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked at nothing in particular. That was when the sky changed color. It started small, a strange greenish shimmer above the tree line, like heat rising off asphalt, except it was 9 in the morning and barely 70 degrees. Sheriff Roy Tanner stopped walking. Wanda Dawson looked up from her clipboard, and Dale Kowalski, still holding the microphone, said the words that would end up on every local news station by nightfall. Folks, I think we might need to pause the competition for just a moment." The shimmer split apart, and something dark and enormous began sliding down out of the clouds, moving slow and heavy. Like a battleship had somehow learned to fly. It was headed straight for the fairground, straight for the pumpkins, the trebuchets, and 400 people who had come out for a nice Saturday of watching produce get launched across a cornfield. Earl looked at Wanda. Wanda looked at Earl. Then Earl looked at all Thunderjaw, fully loaded, fully cocked, and ready to fire. "Well," Earl said slowly, "reckon we're about to find out just how far this thing can really throw." The first ship touched down in the north pasture, flattening a row of soybeans that belonged to a farmer named Gary Holcomb, who would later spend more time complaining about his crops than about the actual alien invasion. The hull was matte black, humming with a low vibration that rattled the folding tables and knocked over 3 cans of soda before anyone even had time to scream. For a few seconds, nobody moved. 400 people stood frozen in a Bramwell County fairground, staring at a spacecraft the size of a high school gymnasium. Then Big Mike, still holding a corn dog, said the only thing that made sense to say. "Well, that's new." A hatch opened on the side of the ship with a hiss of pale smoke, and a ramp lowered into the flattened soybeans. Marching down it came a line of armored figures, tall and lean, with silver-plated suits and rifles that pulsed faintly blue at the tip. At the front walked their leader, broad-shouldered, faceplate polished to a mirror shine, carrying himself like a man who had never once been told no. A translator device on his chest crackled to life. "People of this world," the leader announced, his voice booming out across the fairground in oddly perfect English. "I am Commander Kane of the Vorthane Dominion. Your planet has been selected for annexation. Lay down your weapons and submit peacefully, and no harm will come to you." There was a pause. Then Sheriff Roy Tanner spat on the ground and said, "Son, you just landed in the middle of a pumpkin Chunkin championship. Ain't nobody here got weapons." "We got produce." Commander Kane tilted his head slightly as if recalibrating. "Produce," he repeated. "Pumpkins," Roy clarified, "big ones. We throw them real far for fun." Kane's soldiers exchanged uncertain glances behind their visors. This clearly was not part of the invasion briefing. Meanwhile, Tyler Briggs, 17 years old and armed with nothing but a homemade PVC air cannon, and the reckless confidence of a teenager who had just watched real live aliens walk out of a spaceship, did what any red-blooded American teenager would do. He grabbed a 9-pound pumpkin off the way station, jammed it into the barrel of his cannon, and yelled at the top of his lungs. "Hey, Four Eyes, catch!" He hit the trigger. The compressed air released with a deep thump, and the pumpkin rocketed across the field at nearly 200 miles an hour, slamming directly into the chest plate of the nearest alien soldier with a wet, thunderous crack. The soldier flew backward off his feet, landed in Gary Holcomb's flattened soybeans, and did not get back up right away. For one full second, the entire fairground went completely silent. Then Wanda Dawson grabbed Earl by the sleeve. "Earl," she said, "pull the pin." Earl did not need to be told twice. He yanked the release lever on all Thunderjaw with everything he had. The massive counterweight dropped. The arm swung upward with a groan of straining wood and steel, and a 14-pound pumpkin launched off the sling at a speed that defied everything Gary Holcomb's insurance policy was prepared to cover. It arced high over the field, whistled through the air, and detonated against the hull of the alien ship in a burst of orange pulp and seeds. Commander Kane stared at the wreckage of pumpkin guts sliding down his ship's armor plating. "This is not the resistance profile we were briefed on," he said quietly to his second in command. Behind him, more ships were beginning to descend across Bramwell County, one landing near the Baptist church parking lot, another settling into the Wilkersons' cow pasture, scattering a herd of very unimpressed dairy cattle. Word was already spreading fast through the crowd. Cell phones came out, people started running for their trucks, and somewhere near the judge's tent, old Walt Higgins was quietly and calmly moving Big Bertha behind a stack of hay bales. Muttering something about not letting 71 years of pumpkin genetics go to waste over some overgrown lizards in tin suits. Commander Kane raised his weapon and gave the order every soldier in his unit had been trained to follow without hesitation. Secure the humans. Non-lethal force only until further notice. But as his soldiers advanced across the fairground, they did not notice the geese. Bramwell County had a resident flock of Canada geese that lived near the retention pond behind the fairground. And every single person in the county knew one simple rule passed down through generations. You do not go near the geese. You do not look at the geese wrong. You absolutely do not walk between the geese and their pond. 3 alien soldiers, moving in tight formation toward the crowd, did exactly that. The honking started low, then rose into a furious, deafening chorus, and within seconds all 3 soldiers were surrounded by a flapping, hissing, wing-beating wall of pure avian rage that no amount of alien combat training could have possibly prepared them for. Commander Kane watched through his visor as one of his most decorated soldiers was chased screaming across a cornfield by a goose the size of a dog. "Status report," Kane barked into his communicator. There was a long, static-filled pause before his second-in-command finally answered. "Sir, I don't think this planet plays by normal rules." Within 20 minutes, the Bramwell County Punkin Chunkin World Championship had officially become the strangest battlefield in recorded human history. Word had spread across the county faster than any emergency broadcast could manage. Mostly because half the town had it live on their phones before the sheriff's department even finished dialing the state police. Every trebuchet team on the fairground had reached the exact same conclusion at the exact same time. If a machine built to throw a pumpkin 400 yards could dent an alien battleship, then every single one of those machines needed to start throwing immediately. The Miller brothers, whose suspicious-looking contraption had been under legal review just an hour earlier, wheeled it into position without waiting for anyone's approval. It turned out their machine was a modified air cannon capable of launching frozen turkeys, which they had built 2 years earlier after a dispute over the definition of a pumpkin. Nobody had time to argue about rules anymore. A turkey the size of a bowling ball rocketed across the field and took an alien soldier clean off his feet. "Called it," one of the Miller brothers shouted. "Told you frozen turkey travels better than fresh pumpkin." Sheriff Roy Tanner had abandoned crowd control in favor of directing a very different kind of operation. He climbed onto the bed of his patrol truck with a bullhorn borrowed from the volunteer fire department and started shouting instructions across the fairground like a man who had somehow trained his whole life for this exact moment. "Every Chunkin team, hold your position. Load your best pumpkin. Wait for my mark, and give these things everything you got." Wanda Dawson, meanwhile, had pulled a folding table over to all Thunderjaw and was recalculating trajectory angles on the fly, adjusting the counterweight ratio with the kind of calm precision most people only manage during a Sunday crossword puzzle. "Earl," she said, not looking up, "ship's moving 12 feet to the left. Compensate or you're gonna waste a good pumpkin." Earl adjusted the frame without a word of complaint, because 30 years of marriage had taught him that when Wanda gave a number, you did not question the number. Meanwhile, near the retention pond, chaos of an entirely different kind was unfolding. The geese, having successfully routed 3 alien soldiers, had apparently decided the entire invasion was now their business. More geese poured out from the tree line, joined by a family of very large, very unbothered snapping turtles that had been sunning themselves at the pond's edge and did not appreciate the sudden noise. One alien soldier, retreating in a panic from the geese, backed directly into the shallow end of the pond and discovered, far too late, that Bramwell County ponds were not empty. Old Walt Higgins had, in the meantime, quietly repositioned Big Bertha the giant pumpkin onto a flatbed trailer, normally used to haul the county fair's prize-winning hog to competitions. He hitched the trailer to his pickup truck with the calm efficiency of a man who had clearly thought this through far more than anyone expected. "What in the world are you doing with that thing?" Dale Kowalski asked, ducking behind a hay bale as another blue pulse of alien weapons fire scorched the grass nearby. "Winning," Walt said simply, and drove off toward the north pasture without further explanation. Commander Kane, watching the battle unfold from a raised platform near his ship, was beginning to understand a deeply uncomfortable truth. His forces had conquered 11 worlds across the Vorthing Dominion's expansion campaign, each one falling within hours of first contact. None of those campaigns had prepared him for a species that responded to an alien invasion by launching root vegetables at supersonic speeds. "Sir," his second-in-command said, static crackling through the comm line, "we've lost contact with the retrieval squad near the water source." "The geese again?" Kane asked. "Worse, sir. There appears to be a large reptile involved." Kane closed his eyes behind his visor for a long moment. "Reroute all units away from any body of water," he said. "And someone tell me why our scanners are reading these humans' produce as a level 3 kinetic threat." Back near the main fairground, Earl Dawson finally got the mark he was waiting for. Sheriff Tanner's voice boomed across the field through the bullhorn. "Fire!" Trebuchets swung, air cannons fired. Somewhere behind them, the Miller brothers launched their second frozen turkey of the day. A wave of produce, poultry, and one particularly ambitious watermelon soared across the Bramwell County sky and slammed into the alien line with the combined force of 43 years of competitive pumpkin engineering. Commander Kane watched his forward line collapse under a barrage of flying vegetables, and for the first time since landing on this world, he felt something he had never once experienced in his entire military career. Genuine bone-deep confusion. "Sir," his second-in-command said quietly, "orders." Kane stared out at the smoke, the geese, the pumpkins, and the truck now speeding toward the north pasture, hauling something enormous and bright orange behind it. "Bring out the walker," Kane said finally. "It's time we stopped underestimating this planet." The walker came down from the mothership like a falling water tower, 3 stories of gunmetal gray armor, 4 articulated legs, and a central cannon that hummed with enough energy to level the fairground's main tent in a single shot. It landed in the middle of the churned-up soybean field with a boom that rattled windows in 3 different farmhouses, and for a moment, even the geese went quiet. "All right," Sheriff Roy Tanner said, lowering his bullhorn slightly. "That one's a bit bigger." Commander Kane's voice boomed from external speakers mounted on the walker's hull, his patience clearly running thin. "People of Bramwell County, this resistance ends now. Lay down your produce and you will be spared." Earl Dawson looked at Wanda. Wanda looked at all Thunderjaw, already reloaded, counterweight straining against the release pin. "Reckon it wants an answer," Earl said. "Give it one," Wanda replied. Earl pulled the pin. The trebuchet swung, and a 16-pound pumpkin rocketed toward the walker at full speed, only to burst harmlessly against a shimmering blue shield that flared to life around the machine a split second before impact. "Shields," Wanda muttered, already recalculating. "Of course it's got shields." The walker's central cannon rotated, aimed, and fired a blast that tore straight through the judge's tent, sending folding chairs and clipboards flying in every direction. Dale Kowalski dove behind the announcer's booth, still somehow clutching his microphone. "Folks," he said into it, voice shaking but oddly professional, "we are experiencing some unexpected delays to today's championship." Tyler Briggs, reloading his homemade air cannon with shaking hands, turned to Sheriff Tanner. "Its shields only cover the front," Tyler said. "I saw the flare pattern. It's gotta be weaker from the side or the back." Roy Tanner narrowed his eyes at the walker, then at Tyler, then grinned like a man who had just found the loophole he needed. "Kid," he said, "how fast can that machine of yours reload?" "Fast enough. Then get around behind that thing and start making noise, draw its attention. We'll hit it from every other angle we've got." Word spread across the fairground fast. Every trebuchet team, every air cannon crew, and even a few kids with slingshots began repositioning around the walker in a wide, uneven circle, exactly the kind of chaotic, undisciplined formation that no military academy in the galaxy would have ever recommended, and exactly the kind of formation that made absolutely no tactical sense to predict. Commander Kane, watching from the walker's elevated command seat, felt his confusion deepen into something closer to alarm. "They are surrounding us," his second-in-command said. "That is not possible," Kane replied. "They have no coordinated command structure, no training." No discipline. Sir, they appear to be organizing anyway. Out near the north pasture, Walt Higgins had backed his flatbed trailer up beside an old grain silo, using the structure to keep Big Bertha out of the walker's line of sight. He climbed down from his truck, pulled a tarp off a contraption bolted to the back of the trailer, and revealed what looked suspiciously like a modified irrigation pump connected to a length of steel pipe angled skyward. Told my daughter I'd never use my old propulsion notes again, Walt muttered to himself, tightening a bolt. Guess I lied. Back at the main field, Tyler Briggs sprinted along the tree line, cannon slung over one shoulder, drawing the walker's central cannon around to track him. The moment its shield flared toward his position, 3 trebuchets fired from the opposite side in perfect, if entirely accidental, coordination. 2 pumpkins burst harmlessly against the shield's edge, but the third caught the walker's rear leg joint at an angle nobody had planned for, and something deep inside the machine sparked and groaned. Rear leg integrity compromised, a mechanical voice announced inside Kane's cockpit. How, Kane demanded, is a piece of fruit compromising a war machine? His second-in-command hesitated before answering. Sir, I don't believe it was fruit alone. I believe it was fruit thrown with considerable local expertise. The walker lurched sideways, one leg dragging through the soft, churned-up soybean field and Sheriff Tanner, watching from behind his patrol truck, allowed himself the smallest, most satisfied grin of his entire career. Load up again, he shouted across the field. We got it rattled. Now we finish it. But as the walker steadied itself and its cannon began charging for what was clearly going to be a much larger, much angrier shot, a new sound rolled in from the north pasture. A deep, grinding mechanical whine, growing louder every second, coming from somewhere behind the old grain silo. Wanda Dawson turned toward the sound, squinting into the distance. Earl, she said slowly, what in the world is Walt Higgins doing? Nobody had an answer yet, but whatever it was heading straight for the walker, and it was moving fast. The grain silo's old feed chute groaned, as Walt Higgins fed one final adjustment into his makeshift launcher. A modified irrigation pump, repurposed with the same core principle he had spent 30 years perfecting for missile guidance systems, except this time the payload was not a warhead. The payload was Big Bertha, 1,142 pounds of prize-winning Bramwell County pumpkin. Now strapped into a steel cradle, angled directly at the crippled war machine limping across the soybean field. She's not built for speed, Walt said to nobody in particular, tightening the last valve. She's built for mass. Commander Kane's walker staggered forward on its damaged rear leg, cannon fully charged, aimed squarely at all Thunderjaw and the small cluster of humans defending it. Earl Dawson stood his ground, jaw set, hand already on the release pin for one final shot, even though everyone on that side of the field knew a single pumpkin was not going to be enough this time. Wanda, Earl said quietly, get behind the truck. Not a chance, Wanda said, standing right beside him. Kane's voice boomed across the fairground one last time, distorted now with something that almost sounded like genuine frustration. This planet was supposed to be a routine annexation. Yeah, well, Sheriff Roy Tanner called back from behind his patrol truck, welcome to Bramwell County. Nothing here's ever routine. The walker's cannon reached full charge, a blinding white light building at its core, and for one long, breathless second. It looked like all Thunderjaw's final stand was about to end in a very short, very bright flash. Then Big Bertha hit. Walt's launcher fired with a deep, earth-shaking thud, sending the giant pumpkin screaming across the north pasture in a low, brutal arc. Far too heavy to be stopped by any shield calibrated for smaller projectiles. 1,142 pounds of dense, fibrous pumpkin flesh slammed directly into the walker's damaged rear leg joint at a speed that turned the shield's protective flare into a useless, flickering afterthought. The leg buckled entirely. The walker tilted, groaned, and came crashing down sideways into the soft, churned-up soybean field with an impact that could be felt half a mile away. Its cannon discharging harmlessly into open sky instead of Earl Dawson's trebuchet. For a moment, the entire fairground held its breath. Then the crowd erupted. Every trebuchet team, every air cannon crew, Every kid with a slingshot came pouring across the field toward the downed war machine, hurling whatever produce they had left onto its smoking hull. Not because it was still necessary, but because 43 years of competitive pumpkin Chunkin pride demanded a proper victory lap. Commander Kane's escape hatch blew open with a hiss of steam, and he stumbled out into the mud, faceplate cracked, armor scorched, and stood facing a wall of Bramwell County residents armed with nothing but pumpkins, turkeys, and one extremely confident teenager holding a smoking PVC cannon. "Stand down," Sheriff Tanner said, stepping forward with his hands raised in a gesture that was somehow both friendly and completely non-negotiable. "It's over, Commander. Your walker's down. Your soldiers are either running from geese or explaining themselves to a snapping turtle. And I got a whole county fair watching you on their phones right now." Kane looked around slowly, taking in the scene properly for the first time. Geese chasing his soldiers across a cornfield. A pumpkin the size of a small car sitting, cracked open beside his fallen walker. An entire crowd of unarmed civilians who had somehow organized themselves into a functioning defense force, using nothing but county fair equipment and pure stubborn instinct. This world, Kane said quietly, mostly to himself, was not properly surveyed. "Yeah," Tyler Briggs said, lowering his cannon with a grin. "You're gonna wanna mention that in your report." Kane raised his communicator with a shaking hand and spoke slowly into it, choosing his words with the careful precision of a man who knew exactly how this was going to sound back home. "This is Commander Kane, requesting immediate withdrawal of all remaining forces from designated target world. Recommend permanent removal of this world from future annexation lists." There was a long pause before a voice crackled back through the static. "Reason for withdrawal, Commander?" Kane looked out at the wreckage of his walker, the geese, the pumpkin guts, and Big Bertha's shattered remains still steaming in the afternoon sun. "Local agricultural defense capability," Kane said, "exceeds current threat assessment models." By sunset, the last of the Vorthane ships had lifted off from Bramwell County, trailing smoke and what Earl Dawson swore looked like a very embarrassed retreat pattern. The fairground looked like a war zone crossed with the world's messiest produce stand, pumpkin pulp everywhere, a dented war machine slowly sinking into Gary Holcomb's ruined soybean field, and one very confused flock of geese still patrolling the retention pond like they had personally won the entire battle single-handed. State police arrived 2 hours too late to do much besides take statements and stare in disbelief at the wreckage. National news vans rolled in not long after, and by the next morning, Bramwell County had become the most talked-about small town in the entire country. All because of a pumpkin Chunkin championship that had somehow ended with an alien invasion, getting personally embarrassed on live video. Sheriff Roy Tanner gave exactly one interview, standing in front of the fairground with his hat pulled low and his arms crossed. "Folks ask me all the time what Bramwell County's secret is," Roy said. "Truth is, we just don't scare easy, and we sure don't like people showing up uninvited and messing with our pumpkins." Earl Dawson and Wanda Dawson ended up winning the championship after all, mostly because the judges agreed that hitting an actual alien warship counted as exceeding the distance requirement by a significant margin. All Thunderjaw got a small plaque near the fairground entrance, right next to a chunk of the walker's armor plating that Earl kept as a trophy on his front porch. Tyler Briggs got a scholarship offer from a state engineering program less than a month later, mostly because someone at the university had seen the footage of a homemade PVC cannon taking down an armored alien soldier, and decided that kind of raw talent deserved a proper education. Walt Higgins never did grow another pumpkin quite as large as Big Bertha, though he swore up and down every year that next season's crop would be the one to finally beat her. Nobody in the county doubted him. Nobody ever really had. Dale Kowalski, the announcer, became something of a minor celebrity after clips of him calmly narrating an alien invasion into a microphone went viral across the entire internet. He still opens every championship the exact same way now, adding one extra line to his usual introduction. "And folks, if anything unusual shows up in the sky today, we will handle that the same way we handle everything else around here. One good throw at a time." As for Commander Kane, the Vorthane Dominion's official survey records were quietly updated within the following month. A new notation appeared beside the designation for Earth, specifically flagging the region once known as Bramwell County. Local population possesses advanced kinetic agricultural weaponry. Wildlife is uncooperative and highly aggressive. Avoid annexation attempts during harvest season. Recommend permanent avoidance of any event involving the Phrase World Championship. Back in Bramwell County, life returned to normal within a couple of weeks, or at least as normal as it could after the world had watched a county fair fight off an alien invasion using pumpkins, turkeys, and one extremely determined flock of geese. The fairground was already being rebuilt in time for next year's championship, and if anything, ticket interest had only grown. Sheriff Roy Tanner stood at the edge of the field one evening, watching the sun go down over the freshly repaired soybean rows, and allowed himself a small, satisfied laugh. "Some towns get famous for a football team," he said quietly. "We got famous for throwing vegetables at outer space. If you made it this far, drop a comment and let us know which part of Bramwell County's defense was your favorite, whether it was the geese, the frozen turkeys, or Big Bertha's final throw. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. Share this with somebody who needs a laugh today, and we will see you in the next one."